As the second step in this example, let's go ahead and think about computing some placement points. So we're going to compute some rib placement points. What we're going to do is basically figure out how many ribs we want and put some points on those different lines that we're going to use to place the adaptive components. Now, in order to go through and get the groups of points that are necessary for placing the ribs, I'm going to have to transpose to kind of pull the points together that are all in the same parallel locations. The panel placement points is going to use somewhat of a similar operation. Here what I'm going to do is basically take the curves, I'm going to create some curves along each rib, and then subdivide each of those different curves by a number of different panel points. Okay, this will basically set up a series of points on each of the different rib curves that we can then go through and start to quad together to get a series of different panel placement points. So, like a series of 4 different points that can be grouped together and actually be used to place the adaptive panels. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So, it's all going to start with a whole notion of I'm going to pull some of these different curves together. I'm going to take that NURBS curve. That was going to be my little sine wavy curve. That's my replacement for line number 2. I'm going to get line number 1 or line number 3 over there. See if I can, there's line number 1. It's way up at the top. See if I can pull that over. Zoom that in. Okay, so now I have a list of these 3 different lines. Let's just run that. Can I make sure things are looking good? Looking good. Okay, with these 3 different lines, I can now take that over and I can decide really how many ribs I want. That's going to result in a number of different placement points for the ribs. I'll pull that in and get my little curve parameter. You'll see what's going to happen is now I have 12 different points on each of these different lines. So on the big line as well as on the sine wave. So that's all looking pretty good so far. What I'm going to do now is basically kind of gather those points together. So the 1, 2, and 3 together by transposing the list. So as opposed to being 3 lists of 12, it's going to be 12 lists of 3. And then just to help myself visualize that, I'm going to go through and take those and make a nice little NURBS curve. So now you can start to see, I'm going to pull that out of the way over here, spin that around for you a little bit. Those are the curves which are going to represent each of the different ribs. And the reason they wave a little bit is because the center point kind of is following that sine curve. So they have a little bit of a kind of torch shape to them. Okay, so far so good. What we need to do now is basically take each of those different rib curves and subdivide it into the number of panel points. That'll then give us some different points, a nice grid of points that we can use to quad together. So I'm going to take that NURBS curve and the number of panel points and bring them together. And if I run this, you'll see now I have like, more of a grid of points. So if I take a look at that, you can sort of see it's rows and columns of points. Well, so far so good. You'll notice that it is just rows and columns. It's not in an outer list. So we can go through and just pull that over to quad our rectangular grid. And that'll give us these groups of 4 points. Okay, now this actually has an outer layer of hierarchy to it, so I need to flatten that list out. And finally, now we're ready. We have a list of 4 points. Those are going to be used for placing the panels. We have the list up here of the groups of 3 points. Those are going to be used for placing the ribs. So we're now ready to start actually placing the adaptive components.